I don't know about you guys, but I
Yeah.
think spending it with some seriously curious medicine sounds pretty good to me.
Right.
So that's what we're going to do today.
Let's get into it.
We are going to be exploring the origins of medical journals, and specifically England's first one.
Okay.
And you might be surprised to hear this, but this wasn't like some stuffy old academic journal.
No.
We're going to be talking rabid cats earwax remedies.
Wow.
All that good stuff.
That's pretty exciting.
And really just get a glimpse into 17th century life.
A journey back in time.
That's right. And to do that, we've got some really interesting sources.
Yes, we do.
So we're going to be using a modern article all about Medicina Curiosa, which is this journal,
Right?
and a research paper from The Lancet about that exact same journal.
Yep.
And then some historical snippets about early journalism. So we
Yeah.
kind of put everything into context.
A lot to unpack.
Definitely. Okay, so let's just imagine England in the 1600s.
All right.
What was medicine like back then?
Well, it was kind of a fascinating blend of old and new.
Okay.
So think about, ancient beliefs like Galenic medicine, and that was all about balancing the body's humors through things like bloodletting.
Oh.
And that was still very much in practice then.
Okay, so lots of leeches
Yeah.
and, questionable potions and things.
Pretty much.
Okay.
But at the same time, there were all these new scientific discoveries emerging,
Right.
like William Harvey's work on blood circulation and a growing understanding of the nervous system.
I see.
So it was a time of real upheaval in medicine.
Yeah.
These groundbreaking advancements were like challenging centuries-old practices.
Wow, a real clash of the titans.
Exactly.
Did this shift in thinking have anything to do with the printing press, do you think?
Absolutely. This is the era when medical knowledge started becoming more accessible
Okay.
to those outside the traditional physician elite,
Mm-hmm.
And you're right to think of the printing press. It played a huge role in the rise of journalism in the 17th century.
Interesting.
People were hungry for news just like today,
Right.
but back then they didn't have smartphones or the internet.
Well, yeah, so how did they get their news? Carrier pigeons?
Not quite.
Town criers?
No. Early newspapers actually evolved from handwritten newsletters and broadsheets.
Oh, wow.
So they were literally passed from person to person.
Interesting. So that brings us to our star of the show, Medicina Curiosa, published in 1684.
Yes.
And it sounds like this was pretty unique for its time.
Yeah, it really was.
It wasn't like a typical academic journal, filled with jargon and stuff.
Right.
Like only a scholar could understand it. It actually collected summaries and practical advice from all different sources across Europe.
Oh, wow. So it's almost like a digest of medical information.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So who was the target audience for this? Was this aimed at physicians or everyday people or?
That's a bit of a mystery still.
Okay.
But it seems likely that it was targeted at healers outside of the traditional physician elite. So perhaps like apothecaries or surgeons,
Yeah.
But it may have even reached curious everyday people who wanted to learn about their health and, all.
So bridging the gap between,
Yeah.
those complex medical texts
Right.
and what everyday people wanted.
Exactly.
Okay, so I'm definitely intrigued now.
Okay.
So what kind of juicy tidbits were in this journal?
Okay.
Like, do they have articles like 10 home remedies for the plague,
Well, not exactly. But the Lancet article mentions some pretty captivating details. For instance, there were writings on ear anatomy and treatments from a French physician named Monsieur Duvernay.
Okay.
And he recommended some rather interesting remedies,
Oh, boy.
including the use of bullock skull.
Bulk skull.
Yeah.
I'm suddenly feeling very grateful for modern eardrops.
Right.
But what is bullock skull?
Well, it's the bile from a bull.
Okay.
And it was believed to have all these medicinal properties back then.
Interesting.
And remember Galenic medicine?
Uh-huh.
The idea was that substances like this could help balance the body's humors.
Right. That's so fascinating.
It is.
It's a good reminder of just how medical beliefs have evolved over time.
For sure.
What else was in this curious collection?
Well, the journal also included a series of 100 case reports.
Okay.
And one particularly harrowing tale describes a porter who unfortunately died after being bitten by a rabid cat.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it's...
Hearing that story kind of makes me wonder about the ethical dilemmas physicians faced back then. Like, did they ever feel like their treatments were doing more harm than good? you know?
That's a really good question. And the case report actually details some pretty questionable interventions, including cauterizing the wound.
Oh, wow.
So it really highlights the limitations of medical knowledge at the time.
Right.
And how desperately they were seeking solutions, even if those solutions weren't always effective.
Yeah.
And it makes you think, you know, how much has medical information sharing really changed since then?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, as we were discussing that case of the porter and the rabid cat,
Right.
it really underscores how far we've come with medical knowledge.
Definitely.
But it also makes me think about, you know, back then, people relied on journals like Medicina Curiosa for health information.
Right.
But what sources do we turn to today?
Mm-hmm.
And are we any better at sifting through it all, you know, with the internet and everything?
That is such a good question. Yeah.
And in a way, we've come full circle.
Really?
Yeah, just like in the 17th century, we
Yeah.
were bombarded with information
Right.
from all directions, websites, social media, even podcasts.
Yeah. It's a lot.
It is a lot,
It can be really overwhelming sometimes,
for sure.
especially when it comes to medical information.
Yeah. And that's the dilemma.
Yeah.
We have more access to medical information than ever before,
Right?
but we also have more misinformation to contend with.
That's true.
So it's like a modern day version of that Culpeperism we talked about,
Uh-huh.
where the abundance of information, both good and bad,
Yeah.
can lead to confusion and even harmful choices.
So how can we navigate this?
Right.
Like, how can we as listeners, you know,
Mhm.
navigate this complex landscape of medical information?
That's a great question.
Should we be, like, questioning everything we read online? I don't think it's about questioning everything,
Okay.
but it is about being a critical consumer of information.
Mhm.
You know, just as people in the 17th century had to be cautious about the remedies they chose,
Right.
we need to be discerning about the sources we trust and the information that we're consuming.
So it's all about critical thinking, right?
Yes.
Like evaluating sources, considering different perspectives,
Exactly.
and not just blindly accepting everything.
Absolutely. It's about looking at the evidence, understanding potential biases,
Okay.
and maybe even consulting with healthcare professionals to get a more well-rounded perspective.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of different perspectives, I'm curious about, you know, the College of Physicians
Right.
and their reaction to Medicina Curiosa.
Mhm.
We talked about them being concerned about Culpeperism,
Right.
but did they try to suppress the journal altogether?
Well, we don't really have direct evidence of that, but it's certainly possible.
Yeah.
The College of Physicians was very protective of its authority, and they saw this sharing of medical knowledge with the public as a potential threat.
Oh, I see.
It's almost like imagine the internet back then. They
Yeah.
would have been very wary of that.
Yeah, that's true.
But
I wonder, though, if they would have also recognized, like, the potential benefits
oh, that's interesting.
of wider access to information.
Yeah.
Because, you know, Medicina Curiosa wasn't advocating for completely replacing physicians or anything.
Right. That's a really good point.
Yeah.
It's possible they might have seen some value in educating the public as long as it didn't undermine their authority.
Right.
It's a tricky balance.
It is.
And it's one that we still grapple with today.
That's true.
Yeah.
It seems like Medicina Curiosa, even though it was short-lived, you know, only 2 issues,
Right.
it was part of a much larger movement
Mm-hmm.
of questioning authority and, you know, making knowledge more accessible.
Absolutely.
And in a way, that's what we're doing here.
Yeah.
Encouraging you, our listeners, to engage with information critically, to think for yourselves and to be curious.
Exactly.
Just like Thomas Bassett was all those years ago.
Right.
I wonder what he would make of the internet and how we share information today.
I think he would be amazed by the speed and volume of information exchange.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he was working with the printing press, which was cutting edge at the time.
Right.
Can you imagine his reaction to seeing a medical article published online and shared instantly with millions of people?
Yeah, it would probably blow his mind.
I know.
But I also think he would be thrilled by the potential to reach a global audience.
Oh, yeah.
He was clearly a forward thinker.
He was.
Someone who wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo.
Right.
He might have even started a medical blog.
Or a podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
But joking aside, what's fascinating here is that even with all the advancements in technology
Right.
and communication, we still face some of the same challenges as Bassett did centuries ago.
So, like, what kinds of challenges?
Well, like the challenge of ensuring accuracy and reliability. And navigating those potential biases,
Yeah.
precisely. And that's where critical thinking comes in.
Right.
It's crucial not just for understanding the information itself, but also for evaluating the source the author's intentions, any potential conflicts of interest.
It's a lot to consider.
It is.
But as we've seen from this deep dive into Medicina Curiosa,
Right.
it's a responsibility we can't afford to ignore.
For sure.
And that's something for all of us to keep in mind as we continue exploring the world of medical information.
Absolutely.
I'm kind of struck by how the 17th century journal, with all its tales of rabid cats and bullock skull,
Right.
it still has so much to teach us about how we navigate medical information today.
That's so true. It's a great point.
Yeah.
Medicina Curiosa really does offer this fascinating lens,
Mhm.
to examine our own relationship with health information.
Right.
I mean, we've seen how that desire for knowledge, the struggle with misinformation, the tension between authority and accessibility.
Yeah.
These are themes that resonate across centuries.
They really do.
Yeah.
It really highlights how some challenges just stay the same, even as technology and, our understanding of medicine have evolved so much.
Absolutely. And it really underscores that enduring importance of critical thinking
Yeah.
when it comes to making decisions about our health.
Right.
We just can't accept information at face value.
Especially today.
Especially today.
With the internet and...
Right, with how fast misinformation can spread.
Exactly. So it kind of brings us back to Thomas Bassett
Yeah,
and his ambitious project.
it does.
Looking back, do you think Medicina Curiosa ultimately succeeded?
That's a tough question.
Yeah.
I mean, it only lasted for 2 issues,
Right.
but its impact really goes way beyond that.
Okay.
Medicina Curiosa paved the way for future medical journals, for one thing.
Uh-huh.
It sparked these conversations about access to medical knowledge. And it challenged the medical establishment to think about, the needs and interests of a wider audience.
It almost feels like a prototype in a way
Yeah.
for the kind of medical information sharing that we see today.
Yeah.
With its attempt to distill all this complex information
Right.
into something more accessible.
Exactly. I think you're right.
Imagine if Bassett had access to the technology we have today.
Can you imagine?
He could have reached a global
Oh,
audience.
totally. With all these curious insights.
He might have even started a podcast.
He might have.
But even without today's technology, Medicina Curiosa left a lasting legacy.
It did.
It's a reminder that quest for knowledge, especially when it comes to our health,
Right.
it's a constant and it's always evolving.
And it's a journey that we all share.
Yeah.
As individuals, we have a responsibility to be informed, to be critical, and to advocate for ourselves. Be curious, but be discerning.
Okay.
Question your sources, seek out evidence-based information, and remember that your health is your responsibility.
That's true.
Don't be afraid to ask questions, to challenge those assumptions,
Aye.
and to have these thoughtful discussions about medical information.
That's great advice. And maybe avoid any earwax remedies that involve bullock's gall.
Definitely. But, as we've seen, the history of medicine is full of surprises.
That's true.
Who knows what's next, right?
Yeah.
The important thing is to approach it all with that critical and curious mind.
Well said. More informed and engaged in your own health journey.
Absolutely.
Till next time, stay curious.